Hello, everyone. This is Shamvi from Designhill and your host for today. I hope you and your families are keeping well and safe and taking all the precautions and taking care of your near and dear ones. Today I would like to welcome each one of you for this session where we are going to talk about different factors and strategies to build a successful podcast show. Today's event is brought to you by Designhill, was leading creative marketplace that caters to the creative needs of businesses and individuals alike who can source high quality designs from professional designers and buy unique products created by independent artists. So, moving ahead, we have amazing panelists for today. Let me introduce you to our first panelist of the day. That's Bruce. Bruce is the host of the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast show, which is one of the top 2% most popular shows out of more than 2.5 million podcasts globally and have gotten listeners from about 155 countries around the world. In addition to this, he also hosts a second podcast called Catholic Sports Radio, which has listeners from about 72 countries around the world. This weekly show is approaching 150 episodes. Bruce has also been a speaker at numerous podcasting events around United States. Welcome, Bruce. Welcome to the panel discussion today. Would you like to say a quick hi to our audience?
Yes, hello, everybody. Thanks for making time to be on this, and to Designhill, thank you for asking me to be a part of it. I'm looking forward to it.
Anytime, Bruce. It's always a pleasure to have you on the panel. Next up, we have Diana. Diana is an international business coach who teaches female entrepreneurs how to rapidly launch and scale their online businesses. She is a multi-passionate and multilingual coach. She is a heart-centered influencer too, and her fierce drive is to impact millions of women to be more and have more without doing more through aligned and inspired actions. Hi, Diana.
Thank you so much for having me. Let's have some fun and inspire people to do some more podcasts. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. And next up, we have Tizer. As a lot of our attendees have already seen previous events with us, and Tizer have been a regular panelist on our events. Hi, Tizer. Welcome. So Tizer is a corporate sales professional who has worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies and is nationally recognized as a top salesperson and manager. He is passionate about pushing himself to achieve high-end results through constant learning, discipline, and helping others. Tizer is extremely competitive and enjoys leading others to find new levels of greatness within themselves. Welcome, Tizer. Welcome on board.
Thank you. Happy to be here again. Thanks so much.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking out time from your busy schedule and joining us today for this event. Great. So before we start this session, we are giving away certificates to all the attendees who will stick around till the end of the session. So brace yourself and stay tuned till the very end. Also, you can take a screenshot of this event and post it on your Twitter accounts and tag DesignhillDH. One lucky winner will have a chance to win a gift card worth $50. So, all right. So before we start this session, let's quickly look at what Designhill is all about.
Need to get your parents off your back? Head to the world's #1 creative marketplace, Designhill.
When I started my photography business, I needed something that said this was more than just a hobby. It's not a hobby, Mom. That's why I went to Designhill and got an amazing logo super fast at a price I could afford. The process was easy using Designhill's logo maker. Just enter the name of your business, then pick out a number of designs that inspire you. I'll pick this one and that one looks cute. Then pick your colors or let the system decide. Add some more info like a slogan, the industry your business is in, and your budget. The logo maker, using machine learning and artificial intelligence, will design thousands of logo variants that you can choose from and adapt. In fact, I was able to get everything from business cards to t-shirt design and complete social media kit, all with the click of a button. With that, I'm all set. Now everyone I meet knows I'm a legit photographer. Even my mom. It's real. That's Decaf.
Let the world know it's real and build your brand with Designhill.
All right, and I'm now all set to start the session. So we will also be taking up questions during the session, guys. So if you have any questions, please put it under the questions tab, and it'll be easy for me to pick up questions from there. So let me start with the basic first question to Bruce. Why podcast, Bruce, and how can one break into the world of podcasting?
Well, I'll make a very long answer very short. Why podcasting is because it just opens so many doors. There's so many things that you can accomplish that I would argue you otherwise couldn't accomplish. I'm talking about things like connections that you could make, meaningful conversations that you could have with people who otherwise wouldn't answer your phone call or your email. And the way I use it, it helps me build relationships that I can then apply to my business and the clients that I'm working with. And as far as how you get started, there's so many roads that we could go down with that answer in terms of what equipment or niching down to something that's very specific. But really, the best advice I could give in terms of how to get started is to just get started. Because what I have found in my experience is there are so many people who say, I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to do a podcast. And every time you see them, they're going to do a podcast. And a week goes by, and a month goes by, and 3 months go by, and they never start the podcast. The reason being, they are waiting for everything to be perfect and for every box to be checked. And the longer and longer they wait, nothing is ever going to be perfect. You're never going to have everything ready. So it's better just to start and get used to being a podcaster and getting the reps and getting your business, your product, or your service out there through your podcast, and kind of refine it as you go along, polish everything up. But don't wait to start until everything is where you want it to be, because it's going to be 6 months from now and you're still not going to be ready. So I just encourage everyone to start. As long as they have an idea, just start.
Yeah, right. I mean, you need to start somewhere, and if somebody is determined to get inside the world of podcasting, at least you should just start. Tizer, your points?
Yeah, well, I echo a lot of what Bruce said. I think it's a great platform because, you can always be on the go and listen to podcasts, right? People are really into consuming information, and we all learn in different ways. So I think this is a great medium for people to be able to listen in their car, while they're laying in bed, right? And you can get the information and learn the information different way wherever you're at in the world. So that's a beautiful platform to be able to reach clients, people you're trying to inspire. There's lots of different ways you can have a podcast, and the meaning, what's the meaning behind the podcast? And then as far as, the entry point, it's cool because there's so many platforms where it's free. So you don't really, to Bruce's point, you don't really have an excuse not to start because there's no barrier to entry. You don't need a fancy microphone like I have or a boot arm. You can just simply record on your cell phone with the free application you got downloaded in an app.
Yeah, true. Diana, would you like to add something to this?
What do you add to these two perfect answers? But yeah, I would say, like, I echo what Bruce said. Really, like, ready is a lie, and you will never be ready. So just start, because 1 year from now, you will wish that you started earlier. And I remember when I started in my closet. I have 3 kids and they're like very noisy, and I started now, like, as Tizer said, like, you don't need to have a fancy equipment to start. Just start and lean on to why are you doing this? For me, it was really important because I loved podcasting, and I met some really amazing podcasters, and I said, hey, this is what my people want. They want to hear me on a regular basis. How can I give them that regular content that is, like, inspiring, and so for me, that was what I wanted, and essentially translated in what my clients want.
Yeah, true. So yes, the first takeaway here is just start somewhere, whether it is anything of what you want to do. So great, thank you for your insights there. Going back to my next question here, give us tips on how to define the structure of a podcast, which attracts a lot of audience. Some tips and tricks. Tizer, would you like to take up this question?
Sure. Well, I think it's, super important to, right, be present on social media and be able to put out little teaser clips. And so people can get a feel for the type of content you're going to be producing. And then, like Bruce was saying, people don't know this, probably they're listening, but Dee and I did a podcast together. She was on my podcast, Grind, Sell, Elevate. And so it's just, having those connections. And then, so Dee got to come on my platform and she got to talk to, my audience. Right. And then oftentimes I go on other people's as guests as well. And I talk to their audience. And so that's a great way to find new people to engage with your content. But I think the biggest thing, again, social media is free. There's no excuse not to put it on Instagram or Facebook or Tumblr or the millions of different types of platforms.
Right, true. That's one thing I think it's very, very important in today's digital world. But so being on social media. Bruce, what according to you, give us tips on how to define the structure of a podcast.
Yeah, I'm focusing on the word structure that you're using. And so I think people are kind of scratching their heads and saying, well, does this mean that I'm supposed to be interviewing guests, or can I do a podcast by myself? I know that I was speaking at an event recently and somebody said to me, what do you think about the idea of doing a roundtable type format? And so the point is that there are many different structures that the podcast can take, whether you do host it by yourself, whether you have a co-host, whether you do interviews, whether you don't do interviews. My real big tip is whichever approach you're going to take, you really need to plan out at the very least, your first dozen shows, if not maybe 15. I would go so far as to say 20. When I first started my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I made a list of 20 guests that I knew I could get. Not that I wanted to get or that I thought maybe I might ask, people that I knew that I could get. That way I could guarantee myself that big exhale, that knowing that, okay, my first 20 shows, I already know who my guests are going to be. So those of you that are watching, I would really encourage you that whichever structure you decide to go with, whether it's by yourself or with a co-host or interview format or not interview, really think about what it's going to be, because you're going to get so excited. You're going to release your first episode or 2 or 3, and all of a sudden you're going to panic and say, now I don't know what I'm doing for episode 4. And guess what? If you don't know what you're doing for episode 4, you certainly don't know what you're doing for episode 5 or 6 or 7. So decide on what the format is, but also remember, it has to be something that you can sustain over a long period of time. Don't get into podcasting just saying, I'm going to try this out and see how it goes, because you're not going to have success. There's already kind of some doubt being planted in your mind that I don't know how this goes, so I'm just going to try it.
Great. So that actually gets me to my next question here, Bruce. You have actually given me a point here to hold on to. Plan your podcast, structure your podcast. So my next question to our panelists here goes to Diana. Maybe you can take this question. Why is content roadmap so critical for success in the podcast industry, and how to create a content marketing plan that converts to real customers through podcasts?
Yeah, I think like the intent is really important. When I started, like I didn't have any intent. And now when I look back, like it was just for me to give value. That was my only intention. Now when we grew, like I think it's so important that we are booked through. So we are starting season 6 in January, and we are booked throughout the whole 2022. And that was not the case from the beginning, but more listeners we have, more we need to be mindful about the content creation. What I think about content creation is always like going back to what people love to hear. So metrics and really tracking what works and what do people actually want to listen, what is performing well, and going back to some old episodes and bringing new experts, new perspectives on the same topic will give that variety. We want to have like really variety so it doesn't get bored. And then also I think extending your network and connections, that's such a big piece of that content creation. If you have guests, we have guests and we do solo. We also have a live talk show that we repurpose to podcast. So there are different things that we do, but it's really like that intentionality, like plan ahead at least 6 months, I would say. And don't forget about the market research. It's so important to go back and check in with your audience. What do they want to hear from you? It's not about you, it's really about the people that are listening to the podcast. And then you go, like, you can have 3 ideas, and from 3 ideas you build, 6 and then 12, and it just grows. So that intentionality is super important.
Yeah, right. Building a content roadmap, building a 6 months content strategy of how to go about it, what topics to cover. I think that's what Bruce meant. I mean, create your at least 20 podcast shows, topics, speakers, everything should be aligned before moving forward. But then, how to create a content marketing in plan in such a way that converts these podcast listeners to real customers. Tizer?
Yeah, on the ROI side, it's important to have some type of offering. But I also wanted just to jump back a bit before we get into the ROI piece on these things. I had a real life experience. So I had my podcast, and when I started, I wasn't doing interviews. I was kind of just me talking. And then I was doing book reviews, and I saw that the book review analytics were really jumping off the page at me. And so as I transitioned into the interview platform, I said, well, what if I just do a whole another podcast just based on book reviews? So I started another one called the Book Legion, and it's just, I review a book a week. And so I have planned out 52 books I'm going to read for the year, and I crush a book a week. And that has actually grown, or I don't even really advertise it. It's grown so organically. It's been really cool. As far as the ROI piece, I think that's important to just, again, that's more of a networking and having a base where people can go. So for, your own personal website, you on the website, it's clear what you do, what your offerings are, so you can steer them in a direction. And or if you sell tangible products, throw a discount out when you go into different shows to intrigue people to come check out your good service or product.
Yeah, right. Bruce, please want to listen to your expert views here.
Yeah, I wanted to add in something that I learned along the way was, you really want to establish your level of expertise so the audience trusts you. And to Tizer's point, if you're trying to get business out of your podcast, they need to hear that you know what you're talking about. So on my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I will oftentimes say to a guest, since I do management and publicity and related services like that for artists, as I'm interviewing a music artist, when they tell a story that I can relate to, I will say, I had a similar experience with a client of mine, and this is what took place. And so the audience hears that, okay, Bruce does this himself, so maybe I should book a one-on-one consultation with Bruce, or maybe hire him to be my manager or my publicist or whatever. And the same thing with Catholic Sports Radio. I built in a segment at the beginning. I got about 10 episodes in before I realized that, wait a minute, I'm introing the show, and just like that, I'm bringing the guest on, and there's no room for me to kind of control the show, control the message myself. So I have a very, very, very short segment. It's like 90 seconds long, but that's kind of my platform to stand on for those 90 seconds and let people kind of understand that this is Bruce, this is who he is, and this is his show, that he has a lot of great guests, and I like listening to the guests, but the one recurring theme throughout every episode is Bruce and what he brings us.
Right. Absolutely. So coming back to content again, what's going to go on the plate on the table? Share with us some resources or tools for researching before digging into the world of podcasting. How should one start? Where should one go to research, to know about what exactly is trending? Maybe Bruce, you can take it.
Yeah, I think this is going to really vary by topic. So for me, I will spend a lot of time, number one, first and foremost, making sure that the guest is qualified insofar as they meet the criteria that I'm looking for. So a lot of that is, in the case of Now Hear This Entertainment, I will look at the artist's website, I'll look at their social media. And the interesting thing is that in doing this research, you can actually not only find out whether the guest is qualified or not, but you can learn some things about them that are only in one place. In other words, you might be, believe it or not, you might actually be looking through their Instagram and see a post that they did about something that they don't even have on their website. So all of a sudden you start to uncover more and more layers and you say, okay, there's plenty here. And in my case, the other research that I have to do is this guest qualified enough to where, because my episodes are 45, 50, 55 minutes long. So I have to look and see, is this someone that can sustain a conversation for that long? Because if they contact me and say, please have me on your show, I have a new single out, well, I'm not going to talk about one song for 45 minutes. So that's a lot of what you're also looking for, is can they bring you meaningful content where the listener isn't going to get bored because you're talking just for the sake of talking.
Absolutely. Diana, would you want to add?
Yeah, for me, like now, what I'm also realizing, it's very like what Bruce said, to pre-qualify the guests. We have an intake form where we do that through several questions, and they need to be very clear of what they are giving to our audience, and it has to be aligned with the purpose and the mission of the podcast. So if that's a no, like we don't even go into the podcast production or recording, it has to be really aligned. If there is a recommendation, if I would know someone, that's a different thing. If someone say, hey, you know what, I have this great guest that would be a great fit for your podcast, that's a different thing. Like Ty recommended recently someone to me, and it was just a beautiful connection. But back to that, like researching the people is so important. Like anything what we do in businesses, like you have to do the work before, the pre-work. Then when it comes to researching the topics, if you're doing a solo shows, I think it's like back to that, like really asking your clients. Don't forget that they are the one who are gonna buy from you. They're the one who will listen from you. And it doesn't need to be, hey, what do you want to listen? It's like, hey, what is the book that you're currently reading, right? And go to that book and check the reviews and pull out some great notes from that. What are people saying about that book? And then you can maybe also talk about the topic in the book, because that's your ideal client. They're saying, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Bring that to the podcast. Then there's a lot of like really good research platforms like Reddit, Quora. Go there and just like type and have a conversation with people. That's essential. Don't make it about you. Like always think about what people want to hear from you.
Right, amazing. Taisa, what tools do you use for your researching onto the topics and, of course, the guests?
Yeah, so I mean, the internet. So no, but to be more specific, one of the things that's helped me in researching, and again, I'll just spend a little bit of time, since we've talked a little bit about, guest platforms, since I have an individual show as well. One of the things I found to be really helpful is to create buckets. And so what I do is like for the book Legion, right? The whole point and purpose of that is I read a book a week that helps to elevate a core pillar of your life. So then I had to define what those pillars were to me and ones I thought that would resonate with others. So then what I cover will be like wealth, spirituality, leadership, sales, right? So then I can define books within those different buckets. So then it's very easy for me to plan out my content. So, then you can almost have like a 6-week strategy where you kind of rotate those books in. So then it's very easy and predictable to plan. And, doing research on books, and then just got to look up, what's being released, authors, stuff like that for me. And the interview stuff, just like what Bruce and Dia said, really important to make sure that you listen to them on another podcast so you can see, how they convey themselves, how they conduct themselves. Because I've unfortunately made the mistake of not doing that a few times. And I've had a person where I've asked one question to and they rambled for 30 minutes. And I was like, this is not even usable. Right. So, I've learned the hard way. So don't do that. So I think that's really important to listen to the content that they've put out in other interviews.
True. Amazing.
I would love to add. Can I
Yeah.
add something else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For people who are just starting out and they don't know where to start, there are like also great platforms like Podmatch and Matchmaker. I think one of these we met as well, Ty, right? And I think it's just such a great pool of podcasters and guests where you don't need to even like think about, hey, I have to search someone. It's really like how they can find you. It's a great platform to just connect with other podcasters and guests. So Podmatch and Matchmaker are really, really great resources for that as well.
Great, great. Thank you so much for your insights, for your amazing insights. So, all right, I hope everyone is having fun and enjoying this session. So, before we move forward, I would like to give a quick shout out to Designhill, was leading creative marketplace for organizing this event. Stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, so we're back again, and let's continue with the session. My next question goes to Tizer. In the podcast industry, data-driven marketing is the road to audio gold. How to give the best listener experience in a podcast show?
Right. So it's a really loaded question. The best listener experience, well, just first and foremost, if you really start to take it seriously, I would really behoove you to invest in a microphone like this one I have in front of me was $35 or something like that. So as far as from that, because it is all audio, right? So we want to make sure we are trying our best to present the best audio quality possible. The market research, again, kind of what Dee was saying, really do your homework on what are people gearing towards. Use yourself as an example. What do you listen to? What are you driven to? I think that's really, really important to make sure that, whatever you're engaged to, what you connect with, that you replicate that, right? One of my favorite quotes by Grant Cardone is "Success leaves clues." And so if you just kind of take that into consideration and take it to heart and look what's out there, how are those people that are in the top 1%? What are they doing? How are they marketing? How are they talking? What type of equipment they have? And a lot of times too, a lot of these people, that Bruce was talking about and Dee was talking about, you can reach out simply on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to them on Instagram and they'll answer your questions. It's amazing to me how many people I've reached out leveraging the podcast and had really great conversations with, or people I never thought I would have a chance to ever talk with, or that they were out of my realm, that I've ended up interviewing, which has been a really cool experience.
Right. Bruce, you want to add down?
Well, I agree with Tizer, absolutely. I'm someone who really subscribes to the theory that you really have to provide good quality audio. And there are people out there who, I'm going to warn you, they're going to tell you just have good content and don't worry about the audio quality. And that's not true when it comes to someone whose audio is so bad that it's just not listenable. Now, at the same time, you can have the best microphone in the world and put out the best quality recording. But yes, if you don't have good content, it's not going to be a good experience for the audience. And I say that as far as when I say trying to be original, and just, I don't mean doing something that's completely off the wall, but I've interviewed people like the keyboard player for Aerosmith, the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks, the drummer for Cheap Trick, the bass player for Pink. These people, they're used to being asked the same questions over and over and over in every interview that they do. So the good listener experience will be hearing those people get asked questions that they're not used to hearing, and taking it one step further. And what I do is I try to get them to give out some helpful information for listeners who are aspiring performers, so that they know how to get their next album project crowdfunded, or how to get their songs placed in TV and film, and so on, how they get booked at better venues. Because the listener wants to have something that not only is entertaining, but something that actually touches them in a way that they feel like they came away learning something new, and not just, when did you get your start in music? That's boring. Everybody asks that question. So I really think that for a good listener experience, you have to have great audio, but then right behind it has to be compelling content that will keep the listener coming back episode after episode.
Absolutely. Content is important. I mean, quality is one thing, and then, quantity. Quality is one thing of the podcast, but then, a topic, a content which you are giving out is more important. Diana, would you want to add down?
Yeah, I'm gonna be more nice or nicer, because I think that there can be like procrastinators in the room, like myself, and thinking like, yeah, you have to have this expensive equipment to start. I'm gonna say like, yes, it is important, but it's also important like, if you are choosing the excuses not to start, that will always be a microphone, I don't know, whatever, like it will always be something. So check in with yourself. Do I really want this, and how can I make it happen? Like, this is really, really important, because sometimes it's just like we will pick up the excuse without even like addressing the internal dialogue that is going in. Also, when it comes to data, I think it's so important that you have, whether you're just starting or you are advanced podcaster, always ask for the reviews. Sometimes it's like so hard for people to just say, hey, can you give a review or whatever? Have this in your structure. It can be in your outro, it can be in the middle, it can be in your intro, it can be in your email when you're sending out. Ask for the reviews, because that's the indicator what people like. People will give you a review and they will say, hey, this was such a great show, especially when they rate a particular show and they tell you, hey, this was really good, we want more of this. So don't be too humble to ask for reviews, right? Always do that, because that's a feedback, direct feedback from your listeners.
True. That is very, very important, to collect the real feedback. So moving on to my next question, Bruce, when it comes to podcasting, what should be the ideal length, day, and frequency of the podcast content to drive better engagement?
I'm laughing because I love this question. It's the question that everybody always asks when they're starting a podcast. And the real answer is a couple things. Number one, whatever you can keep up with. So if you say I'm going to do it 5 days a week, look at your schedule and say, realistically, could you honestly do it 5 days a week? Is it once a week? Because you have to be consistent. The audience is not going to stick with you if you tell them it's going to be every week, and then you take a week off, and then you take another week off. And as far as the length of the show, there's this myth out there that supposedly 23 minutes is the ideal length, and I don't know where that came from. In fact, someone did a study of the top 200 shows on Apple Podcasts, and the average running time was 51 minutes. So the real answer is, once you get to the point where you're talking just for the sake of talking, that's where you stop. So if that ends up being 10 minutes for you, if it ends up being 30 minutes for you, if it ends up being, like I said, for me, 45, 50, 55 minutes, but it's about delivering content that's meaningful, like we were all saying earlier. And if you're just talking for the sake of talking, then obviously you're, for some reason, trying to hit a certain number in your head. So there's no correct answer, other than once you get to a point where that's all you have to say, then the episode is over with. And then, like I said before, making it something that you can sustain on an episode to episode basis, month after month, year after year. I've been doing mine every week for more than 7.5 years, and I've never missed once. And you're not going to look at mine and say, well, wait a minute, here's an episode that was 12 minutes. Here's one that was 22. they're all in that range that I've been saying, 45 to 55 minutes.
Hats off to you, Bruce. Tizer?
Yeah, I would just say that almost the exact same thing. I've had Grindcell Elevate for about 3.5 years. And it's just being consistent every week, to having a particular day. And I specify my day typically on both of my podcasts of when the episodes will be released, so people know what to look forward to. As far as a time format, you've got Dan Carlin's podcast, History on Fire, that goes for 4 hours. You have other ones that will be 5 minutes. So it's really like Bruce is talking about, what can you sustain? What is your vertical? What makes sense? My book, my book Legion, max 15 minutes. I'm in and I'm out. I give you 3 things to think about. I'm done. The interview ones are usually 35 to 45 minutes. So it's just, it's really depend. You're in control, right? So there's that as well. There's no right answer.
Yeah, so there's nothing ideal about the length, the day, the frequency. It's all up to you. It's all up to the content you finalize and the topics you are going to talk about. Diana, your points?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up the quote from one of my guests, who we all know and adore, John Lee Dumas. When he was on my show, he said, my intent with my show 10 years ago was to be the best, to be the worst, and to be the only. So when he created the show almost 10 years ago, he wanted to be the best, known for a particular topic, particular niche. He was also the worst because he was just just starting, but he was the only who actually did the content every day, right? So how can you be the best, the worst, and the only? So it's really about, frequency, what Bruce said. Like, I really want to emphasize that what you can deliver and what you can commit to. Just ask yourself, is it 3 days per week? Is it 2 days per week? And stay consistent and measure. What you can measure, you can manage. So it's really important that you go back. Okay, is this Tuesday and Friday? Is this like Monday and Friday? Which is picking up better? And then just go from there. Like, if you track, you can scale. And that would be my take on.
Amazing insights. So moving on to my next question. In this new age digital world, brands are coming up, and brands are trying to leverage every bit they can, whether it is social media, whether it is any platform on social media. How do you think brands can leverage podcasts to meet the changing market landscape? Tizer?
Yeah, I think that this is the forefront of where we're going for brands, and I think that you if you're a business owner, a small business owner, you need to be really cognizant of this, because there's so many different ways to leverage a podcast. One, you can convey. I think that if you really look at branding's conveying your story and really having people identify with your story. Once they identify your story, they become loyal because they feel like they're a part of something, right? So through podcasting, you're able to really convey your story. You're able to provide your value and insight, which you can bring as a business, but then you can also flip it and you can use it internally. As organizations grow, like I said, I've worked for the last large organization I work for now is about 200 people, but the last one was 70,000 people, right? So if you need to release an internal message, a great way to have a CEO or CFO insight to be able to release to the people is through podcasting. So I think it's just a really beautiful way to get stuff done externally or internally.
Yeah, actually. Diana, would you want to add?
Yeah, I think like when we are thinking about podcasts and where we are going, more and more people are, now we are in this information age where there's a lot of information out there, and people will choose brands that are kind of distinctive to others. So brands have this really amazing, powerful tool to create something that is not created by other brands in their industry, especially like big corporate brands. That's an amazing. I know my university, where I studied, like they started podcasts, and that was definitely something like, wow, the school is actually doing a podcast. That's so cool. And I think this will, like, you have to be distinctive from others in your industry. And podcast is definitely, if we think like, hey, but there are so many podcasters out there, it is not. It is not. There's still so much potential and so much abundance in this field. So
Yeah.
whether you're a personal brand or a corporate brand, start the podcast. It is where we are going.
Podcast, I think, still is picking up in a lot of countries, like especially in India. It is still picking up. Indians still are more inclined towards video content rather than the audio era. Bruce, would you like to add something to Diana and Tyzer's points?
Yeah, I think if you're a brand and you're starting a podcast, there's going to be a tendency for somebody in the organization to say, oh, great, a new sales tool for us. It's not a sales tool, it's a communications tool. The minute you use the podcast to try to start selling to people, that's when you're going to see your numbers go down, because people don't want to be sold to. So if you're on your podcast and you're saying, hey, make sure you buy this new lanyard that we have out, and hey, we have new stickers that you want to buy, people are going to say, all right, stop selling to me. I understand. So it's just building a relationship with your customers, with your audience, with whoever your constituents are, and just letting them see kind of maybe some behind the scenes, and make it very organic, where these are just everyday conversations that are kind of around the topic without being direct sales. They know what you do, and they know what you sort of would like them to do as a result of the conversation that you're having. But if you just beat them over the head episode after episode, you might as well just sit there and read your sales catalog to them, or read them your latest brochure, because that's essentially what you're turning your podcast into, which is not what they want.
Absolutely, absolutely. True, that is. So, we're talking about podcasts, and everything nowadays comes with numbers. So, how to exactly measure the right ROI for a successful podcast show? Bruce, I have to give you this question.
Okay, sure. I actually talk about this more than you would think for a podcast that's essentially about the music business, insofar as we talk a lot about, you really have to define yourself, what you consider success to be. So for everyone, that's going to be different. So I think it's very easy to get hung up on numbers and saying, well, I should have more downloads, or we should be seeing more sales from this. There was someone that had come to me one time and they said, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing my podcast. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because nobody's listening to it. I said, what do you mean no one's listening? They said, well, I never get any emails from listeners. And I said, that's it? Like, that's your whole basis? That's what makes you think that no one's listening? Yeah, I haven't gotten a single email. And they said, well, you have access to your dashboard. Like, you could log into your hosting company and you see that people are downloading the show, right? Yeah, I am. And they said, okay, well, there's people listening then. So, I think there is this tendency to get hung up on, I need to have a certain number of downloads, which, by the way, I think the number is something like 135, that if you're getting 135 downloads of your show in the first 30 days, and you're better than half of the podcasters out there. So to set these unrealistic expectations for yourself, that I have to have 10,000 downloads per episode or 100,000 downloads per episode, especially if you're just starting out, you're really kind of setting yourself up for failure, because these are unrealistic. Certainly you have to have goals that you want to shoot for, but I think you have to define, as I said at the beginning, what success looks like for you, and then manage those expectations and say, okay, how do I reach those goals that are attainable, and give yourself a little slack, and remember that you are brand new to it. I always say that if you're going into podcasting and the very first question you're asking already is, how do I monetize this? Then you're getting into it for all the wrong reasons. So just, give yourself a little bit of a break, define what success is, and make them reasonable goals that you can actually achieve.
Right. Tyzer, um, uh, your views.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I don't know, maybe I don't come at it the right way. I'd never even thought about making money or really caring about the numbers. It was really, I didn't need money when I decided. It wasn't about that. I just really wanted to serve people. And I saw, I started as a sales podcast, and I saw, having managed hundreds of salespeople, there's so many people struggle, but it's a great profession where it can be very lucrative. And so I just said, hey, how can I take the knowledge I have and just give to more people with no intention of ever, like, I didn't care if one person listened or if it was 100,000. As time has gone on, obviously I've started to look at the numbers more, and I obviously want to continue to grow, because now I feel obligated that the more it grows, the more people I can help. But I don't make any money from my podcast. I don't know that I ever will care to. It drives my wife crazy, but it's been more of just a passion project and a way for me to connect with really like-minded people, which actually has, like I've just through podcasting, I just entered it and had my first collaborative book that will be published in January. That never would have happened, but that was always a dream of mine to be an author. So cool stuff just pops up. So I don't know, I'm the best person on this topic to look at. I just have a lot of fun doing it.
Thank you, Tizer. Diana?
Oh, another disappointing answer. We are in the same boat. I think that, and coming from business coaches, it seems like, wow, like she's not monetizing this. No, because it's going back to that. How do you put a price tag on authority? You are building authority in your field by being a podcaster, by bringing this value. Even if you're like, interviewing other people, you are showing up as an expert. And how do you even put a price tag on that? And I think for me, it was a little bit selfish. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do this without monetizing it, without using it as a marketing tool or as a sales tool, but just having fun. And the best thing that when you don't have these big expectations and you change these expectations for appreciation, that you are able to impact someone's life. When someone comes and say, hey, you know what, I listened to this show and it changed my life. Well, how do you put a price tag on that?
True that is. Amazing, superb. So I'm so excited to actually listen to all of your experiences, because it is teaching me a lot. You don't have to wait for things to come. Just do it. Just do your passion. Just follow your passion, like Tizer said. That he never wanted to monetize anything. He just followed what he wanted to do. So yeah, perfect there. So moving on to my second last question here. Where do you think are the right platforms to showcase for podcast portfolios for consistent work? Now, that one thing is, I think everybody, whoever is getting into this business, would want to, also keep doing it. So where to get that consistent work? Bruce?
Can you repeat the question?
Where do you think are the right platforms to showcase your podcast portfolios for consistent work?
Well, I think there's a couple different answers to this question. There's one answer, which is about promoting it. Where can you show people what your podcast is? And I had put a link, and I think Designhill shared that link to
Yes.
a blog that I have that says 20 plus ways to promote your podcast, because everybody thinks that you just put it on social media and that's it. And to that, I say, of course, like, absolutely, that's not rocket science. You better be putting all your podcast episodes, every time you release one, you better be posting on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. It's okay, what else are you doing with it? So I have that link that I did share in the questions tab, and I think Designhill gave everyone that in a pop-up. But in terms of platforms, your hosting company that hosts your audio files, your MP3 files, will be able to distribute that out to places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google Podcasts and Stitcher and the like. But this is where you have a great opportunity to really get creative and figure out where else would it make sense for your podcast to end up. And all you can do is ask. The worst that people can say is no. If you find a website that is perfectly in line with your brand, your message, what your podcast delivers, and you say, it sure would be nice if they could have my podcast on there, well, then contact them and ask them. They may not know about you, but if you don't contact them, they're never going to. So your podcast could end up somewhere that all of a sudden you find, aha, now I'm in front of someone. For instance, I was able to do a trade agreement where I currently have ads for the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast running on musicconnection.com, which is a very popular website for musicians. So they're going and they're used to seeing it's an online magazine, so to speak. So they're used to seeing articles and pictures and reviews and interviews. And so now all of a sudden they see this ad for this podcast that has music interviews. And so all of a sudden here's a platform that people aren't going to just think of traditionally. If you're just following the predictable path, you're just going to get your show on all the podcast platforms that I listed before, and of course on your own website, and you're going to miss some opportunities that maybe there's nobody else that has a podcast on that site, and you could really, open some new doors for yourself.
True. Kaiser?
Yeah, I mean, Bruce kind of crushed that question. So one of the things that I've seen as well that's worked well for me is, like backlinking. So a lot of times the guests, what they'll do, right, they want to promote, like if it's a coach, like what Dee does, or another guy that I think that we both might have interacted with, Trav Bell. He's a crazy Australian guy. Love him though. But right, so I've probably now, I bet out of the 100 or so interviews I've done, probably 40 of them, they've posted the interview on their website that then backlinks to my podcast, and that'll stay there forever. So the more of that I do, then I've got, maybe in 3 years from now, I'll have 400 or 500 different sources that are all funneling to my podcast, right? So that really helps. Even if you Google my podcast, you'll have other people's website that will come up for mine. So it's almost like free advertisement for me. So that's just a way that a lot of people don't think of, that helps your own SEO search for the podcast and then for your own business as well.
True. Diana, how do you promote your podcast portfolios?
Yeah, Bruce said it like really nicely. I think that also for us, what worked really, really well in the past 6 months or even this year was to actually have other podcasters on our show, because sometimes it's like, people who don't have podcasts, they don't know how important it is to actually share the content. And when we have podcasters on, they know that they put their heart out there and they share the content. And what happens also with algorithm on different podcasting platforms is that when you cross interview each other on, so I would go on Bruce's podcast, Bruce would come on my show, the algorithm for some reason picks it up and really helps you to be even more exposed. So that's a really great strategic tip for people like, hey, if you want to get more exposure, definitely have other podcasters, because they know how to promote content. They appreciate that. They give you valid feedback, and podcasting platforms always pick that up. Also, what Tizer said, we also provide our logo, and people love to just feature, just showcase the logo on their website and just put the link or embed the code. So that is really, really great way to meet. Also, when you're featuring people on your podcast, make sure that you are making easy for them to share, maybe like some, graphics, maybe even text, the takeaways. Again, don't make it about you, but people for people who want to share, want to listen. So make easy for them.
True. All right, guys, some great insights from our amazing esteemed speakers. Yes, Bruce, please.
I just wanted to throw something out that goes back to much earlier in the seminar. This isn't connected to what we were just talking to now. But, Tizer mentioned before about, having a great microphone, and I echoed the idea of having great audio quality. If you're intimidated by the idea of starting a podcast from the standpoint of the technology involved, when I started, I just knew I wanted to start. And so I went to a local recording studio, and I was doing my podcast at a recording studio every week. And it allowed me to just get out there and get it started, instead of saying, well, where do I buy this equipment? How much does it cost? And how long does it take to learn it? And who can teach me how to operate the equipment? And, maybe you find like a middle ground, which is maybe you record it on your own and then you send it to somebody remotely who does the editing for you. But, all three of us have talked about not letting things like that stand in your way from starting. So even consider something like finding a local recording studio to go to in person, Or as I said, if you have something where you can get some decent quality audio recorded at home, but you don't have the time or the desire to learn how to edit it, then send it out remotely to somebody just so that it keeps you publishing new episodes regularly.
Absolutely, absolutely right there. All right, guys, this would be my last question. So, last but not the least, share with us some important tips and tricks that one can follow for the new audio era of 2022. Uh, Diana? Diana.
Yeah, I think
Diana.
we are really heading into, the podcast is going to be trend in 2022. Also, what I'm thinking about, like what we got as great feedback is to allow people to give you a review on different platforms. What came up like with all the new iOS updates and all this, like, people were not able to give us reviews and all this stuff. There are so many different platforms where you can actually combine all different types of mobile or whatever you are using. So don't stick only with Apple Podcasts. So they will give you a review there. There are so many different. So like we use review this podcast, and it gives people like really great insight where they can leave a review. Also, when it comes to trends in 2022, I think video will still be a great, the best content machine. If you can repurpose some of your videos into your audios, do that as well, because it just will give you like that overall, you will get out of the overwhelm. So I need to create the video and audio. Create the video and use it as the audio if that's like your jam. Make it easy for yourself so you can be consistent and you can really show up for the people that want to consume your content.
Yeah, right. Tyson? Latest
Yeah.
trends for the new audio era of 2022. Some.
Well, I mean, this, obviously podcast is trending, and who knows if we're all going to be podcasting in the metaverse soon. But one of the things that I think we touched on is this is going to continue to trend, right? This is still at its infancy, and this is what a lot of people don't know. When you hear that there's 2.6 or 2.7, different numbers podcasts out in the world, there's 35 million different YouTube channels. We're just getting started. There's close to 8 billion people on the planet, and there's only 2.7. I look at that as a huge opportunity, more than anything, to be earlier, because the earlier start, the better your SEO is going to be when there are 35 million podcasts, because there will be. So I think that we're still at the infancy stage of this, and this is going to continue to trend. So I would take action in 2022.
True. Bruce?
Well, there is no shortage of people in the podcasting industry who will tell you that Apple Podcasts and Spotify are far and away the two biggest platforms where people are consuming podcasts. But, I still like to recommend that you get your podcast on as many platforms as you can. And there's new ones that pop up all the time. Now, granted, there's a lot of them that come and go virtually overnight. But when you start seeing reputable companies, major global corporations, I'm talking about Facebook, that now has podcasts that you can listen to on Facebook. Both of my podcasts you can listen to on Facebook. When you see that Amazon has extended to where you can get your podcast placed on Amazon Music, I encourage you, jump on all these, especially when it is from major movers and shakers like that, because it's kind of like I always say, when I speak at podcasting conferences, I will say, you really need to be on multiple social media platforms, because people will say, I have an Instagram devoted to my podcast. Well, that's fine, but some people's thing is Twitter, some people's thing is Facebook, and some people's thing, and on and on and on. So it's the same thing. As much as people will tell you Apple Podcasts and Spotify are the two biggest platforms people are using to listen to podcasts, that's fine, but there's going to be the guy or the gal who is listening on Good Pods, or the person who likes the iHeartRadio app or the Stitcher Radio app. I mean, I have my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast on SoundCloud, because that's where music people hang out, on SoundCloud. So it makes sense for a music interview show to be on SoundCloud. So don't get so caught up in just having it on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, especially, to flip what Tizer said the other way, especially if you consider how many there are out there. if someone is looking on their phone at a little cover art that's that big, you're going to stand a tough chance of discovery just because they happen to be scrolling through and they like your cover art. I mean, it's not going to hurt, but the more places you can be, the better chance someone's going to have of finding you. Because if all the other podcasters don't do that, there's going to be fewer on those apps, and someone's going to find your show and say, hey, this is pretty good. I'm glad it's on the app that I use to listen to all my other favorite shows.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just go into the world of podcasting and just throw yourself out and get your listeners from anywhere. So just don't stick yourself to one place or two places. Just be there, right? So that's an amazing takeaway. Great. So I am bounded with time, and we'll have to end this wonderful session with our esteemed speakers here. This was indeed a value packed session, although there was a lot more we could have learned, but unfortunately, again, I'm bounded and limited by time. And I hope each one of you enjoyed the session, because I personally did. Once again, thank you so much, Tizer, Bruce, and Diana, for joining us today for this event. Anything you want to say to our audience?
Go have fun.
Listen to a lot of podcasts. All right.
I put my email address in the chat. If anyone's
Yes.
interested, there's a document that I'm happy to send you that will show you 12 ways to monetize a podcast. It just kind of gets you thinking a little bit. As much as I did say before that shouldn't be the first question that you're asking when you're starting a podcast. The other thing that I've seen is people think that the only way that you monetize is you get sponsors, and that's not the case. So feel free to email me. The email address is in the chat, bruce@nowhearthis.net. And I'll happily send that to you just so that you can kind of get some ideas of what some of these ways are that at some point you can think about trying to monetize your podcast to some extent.
All right, guys. I'm also sharing the LinkedIn handles of our esteemed speakers here on the chat section. If you guys want, you can contact them on their LinkedIn profiles, connect with them. And I think this was really, really a value packed session here. Guys, if you have not registered for our upcoming events, you can also check out our events page, where you can find all our upcoming panel discussions and webinars and AMA sessions. To watch this session and to watch all the other panel discussions which we have done, you can check out our YouTube channel. The links are all the links are in the chat section here. Thank you so much, each one of you, for joining us today here. And I hope to meet all of you again. Thank you so much, guys. On that note, I'll take an off.